we are all. Dear President of Ornim Academic College of Education, dear Professor Amit Schechter, our distinguished speakers and guests, our colleagues and students, on behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to welcome all of you who have joined our virtual international workshop. Why did we decide to focus on issues in early English language teaching and learning? Why this subject is so important and actual? As we all know, there is a modern trend of teaching English in certain Central and Eastern European countries, as well as in Israel, to low age of exposure to English as a foreign language, to first grade of the elementary school, or even to preschools, due to, as you all know, parental pressure to introduce foreign English as a foreign language as early as possible. Because parents, as well as some practitioners, believe in the younger, the better slogan, meaning that younger children could make quicker and easier progress in English as a foreign language than older children. However, this early start of teaching and learning English raises endless questions and issues, such as, do we know actually how to teach English for young children? Does it should be structured lessons? Or do we need to think about the other creative ways to approach children by developmentally age-appropriate strategies? Can children be reluctant to be engaged in structured English lessons? Can children be reluctant to participate in these lessons and to use English productively? What is the role of parents and teachers in motivating children learning English as a foreign language? What factors do affect young learners' motivation? And what are the best research-based strategies to create a stimulating context for early English teaching and learning? How can we approach basic literacy skills teaching, and what is the necessity and what is the need? How can we develop teachers' content knowledge about early language and literacy teaching? These and other issues will be discussed today by our speakers who are acknowledged experts in early English language teaching research. As a chair, I would like to thank to our team who organized this event, and I will start from thanks to Dr. Mule Peleg, head of the International School, Dr. Janina Horowitz, Associated Director of Academic Collaborations in the International School, Ms. Lisa Sharov, Coordinator of the Research Department, Ms. Irit Shaket Lindholz, Ornim International School Office Manager. I would like to thank to our technical support of this event and to all our participants who joined us today. And I'm grateful to our speakers for their willingness to join us and to share their insights today. Now, I would like to start from greetings of our president, Professor Amit Schechter. Please, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mila. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for making the effort to host this, what promises to be, I'm certain, a very interesting event. English, as we know, is the lingua franca of the late 20th and the 21st century. And I think that even more than that, it's become the lingua franca of the digital age. I mean, that is until, of course, emojis will take over and we will all start speaking in emoji language. But at least as far as we know, this is the one language that not only in the academic world, but also in the business world, in the tourism world, is one that allows us to communicate across cultures. And so naturally, it raises the question: how young should one be to start studying this language, wherever you are living? And is there a price for studying this language at an early age? Perhaps a price that has to do with the development of local culture and with the ability to communicate in a rich language, in your own language, with the people surrounding you, the people that you are living among. So I think that this raises a very big question. I can bring from my personal experience. I myself was born in an English-speaking language to non-English-speaking parents. At least it wasn't their native tongue. And I married a woman who grew up in an English-speaking language among English-speaking parents, and then moved to Israel, where we met and we raised our children. And we had to decide, what language are we going to raise them speaking? We speak English at home, Hebrew outside the house. How should we treat the children? I think that I don't know all the people participating here, and I don't see all the pictures because I'm using the gallery, not the gallery view, but the speaker view, so that I don't get confused with all the faces. But if I would tell you that my older son got so confused at the young age when we would switch from English to Hebrew talking to him, that first the rule was that my spouse speaks English to him and I speak Hebrew to him, okay? And so we tried to raise them this particular way. And yesterday I was telling this to my niece that he, at the age of 3, we showed him colors. And we said, which color is this? And this would be appropriate for Ornim, because I showed him the color and he said, what? I said, how do you call this color? And he said, Yarok. I said, great. And how do you say Yarok in English? And he said, Yarok. So for him, it was the accent that basically was enough to understand what the other language was. But even if we decide that a young age is appropriate, studying a foreign language, question is, do we have the appropriate infrastructure and do we have the appropriate know-how to do this? And Mila has explained to me that this is a problem on both levels. First of all, because we don't teach nursery school teachers how to teach English, and English teachers how to teach in nursery school. And so we don't really have the capacity to provide this type of education, even if we wanted to do that. And definitely that leaves us with a very big challenge. And I'm sure you'll have an interesting conversation about this. It's wonderful to have this international cooperation and the capability of Mila to bring, and her team, to bring people together from all corners of the earth. If there is one positive, and I don't think there's more than one positive thing that this coronavirus outbreak has brought us, is that it made the meeting over online facilities, making that a legitimate form of meeting. And we can bring people together and have conversations across the oceans and across borders and even across the hall without having to travel and to pay much for travel. One day we will find the administrator that will make sure that we will get less travel funding in the future. But in the meantime, let us enjoy the positive side of this. I wish you an interesting and valuable conversation. And perhaps when my grandchildren will show around the corner, you will give me advice on how to teach them English at a young age. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Schechter, for your greetings and for your humor. We need it, for your positive words. And we will start from first speaker. Today, we are pleased to welcome my colleague and friend, Professor Daniela Projek-Santovec from the University of Novi Sad in Serbia. Professor Projek-Santovec is an associated professor at the Department of English Studies and the head of the Center for Languages at the Faculty of Philosophy in the University of Novi Sad, Serbia. For many years, Daniela conducted impactful research exploring how to teach English to young and very young learners and in children's literature, with specific focus on nursery rhymes and fairy tales. Her recent co-edited book, here is a book, please see, I'm very glad to illustrate it, Integrating Assessment into Early Language Learning and Teaching, that was published in 2019, is a timely book that widens our understanding of age-appropriate formal and informal assessments. This book is innovative in taking children's agency, including motivation and attitudes toward English learning, into consideration. Today, Daniela will bring her insights on agency in interaction between children, teachers, and parents in preparing foreign English as a foreign language teachers and in pre-primary level. So with that, I ask that you will give your full attention to Professor Projek-Santovec, and Daniela, you're welcome to our college, at least virtually, meanwhile, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the lovely introduction. So I have no need to introduce myself or the paper. I'm going to start sharing the presentation now so that you can follow more easily. Okay, just a second. All right, so as we've heard, the focus on my talk, which is one of Miller's favorite topics and one of the current issues in early foreign language learning and teaching today. Can you hear me well? Just to check, because
yes,
it says my internet connection is not stable. All is okay. All right. Okay, so we have already heard from Professor Schechter that early exposure to foreign languages is considered to benefit children in many ways. So we can have potential linguistic, affective, sociocultural, cognitive gains for children. And of the many foreign languages available, English language, as he already said, as a lingua franca, is one of the most frequently taught at the pre-primary level worldwide. And there are various models and modes of provision in existence, in Europe especially. Okay, so the FL provision differs in pre-primary education in that it's applied as an extracurricular activity taught by externally hired staff and paid for additionally, or it can be included in the pre-primary curriculum, no additional staff hired, nor extra fees involved, and it can either be compulsory and policy regulated or a non-obligatory add-on to the curriculum. Now, models of EFL education at pre-primary level, which are usually available, either center around teaching the linguistic aspects of English, as in a primary school classroom, or they focus on the affective and communicative aspects of language learning and raising children's language awareness. The model that was provided in this research that I'm going to talk about today was a combination of both of these. So we have English, which was included in the curriculum, but externally hired staff was included, and they wished to focus on all four aspects mentioned. The research was done in a private Serbian English bilingual kindergarten in a plurilingual and a multicultural city in Serbia. The kindergarten provides preschool education in Serbian, the language of the majority population, but it also gives daily exposure to English, a foreign and a socially prestigious language in the country, as in many countries around the world. What stimulated our curiosity as researchers was the rather stern approach to English language use within the otherwise relatively flexible curriculum in Serbian, based on language separation. One person, one language approach. As Professor Schechter already mentioned, him and his wife using with their child. But here we had a very strict English-only policy applied. Now, the preschool management imposed this English-only policy on the L teacher regarding the use of L1 in an L2 learning context as utterly undesirable. So she was required to speak English at all times while in the kindergarten in order to maintain the illusion of a person not familiar with the Serbian language, with the aim of forcing the children to produce English-only utterances in communication with her. So the parents were presented with the management stance on this at the beginning of their children's kindergarten attendance, as well as the expectation that this approach would inevitably lead to promoting their children's English language learning. And within the presented approach, translation as a form of using L1 was heavily frowned upon. So the aim of this research was to investigate the kind of agency that the stakeholders in the foreign language learning process exercised, directly and indirectly, in order to influence the process and, if applicable, adapt it to suit their perceived needs. Within this context, the children's agency in terms of L1 and L2 use redistribution was examined, as well as the role of the teachers and parents in encouraging child motivation and instilling positive attitudes towards second language learning. Now, the validity of insistence on the complete language separation in a bilingual context at preschool age is called into question by answering the following research questions. What are the stakeholders' attitudes and beliefs about using L1 in L2 teaching? How did the use of the English-only policy affect the teaching process? What kind of agency do the parents, teachers, and children exercise and with what purpose? And what kind of motivation is nurtured in children and how does it affect their agency? Similarly to some other European countries, Serbia as a country with prevalent multilingualism shows a preference for early foreign language learning, as we have already heard. So with English being one of the frequent choices of parents for their children, although there are some other languages taught as well. Now, the English-only approach to teaching is a frequent recommendation, if not always strictly enacted in Serbian ELT classrooms, as the L1 often seeps in the teaching and learning process for different purposes and in various forms. Now, numerous benefits are listed in theory in favor of the English-only approach, such as, for example, subconscious language acquisition through greater exposure, or improvement of listening skills, purposeful language use, and so on. Additional reasons are practical in nature, such as groups of students not sharing the same L1, either among themselves or with a native speaker teacher, and publishers promoting monolingual course books, which could be used by native speaker experts and be marketed globally. Nevertheless, there are also disadvantages to the monolingual approach, as it has been found that it can be anxiety and guilt-provoking for the teachers because sometimes they cannot honor the exclusion rule completely, as well as frustrating to learners, especially in high-stakes situations when there are direct consequences for the pupils in case of misunderstandings. Now, not challenging the monolingual mindset and banning the L1 from the classroom can be viewed as a form of silencing in a way. Thus, when teachers use L1 within an ELT classroom, they exercise agency by expressing an acceptant attitude towards their students' linguistic identity. For the fervent followers of the English-only rule, the use of L1 in EFL classes is viewed as unacceptable, with L1 seen as an intruder and a problem to be solved. However, L1 can also be viewed as a resource to be embraced, especially at the lower levels of language mastery. Its use can be regarded as an expression of both teacher and learner autonomy and agency. Now, there are three modes of agency operant within social cognitive theory. Individual, when influence is exercised directly with the aim of affecting one's circumstances or environment. Proxy, when lacking direct control over one's life conditions, influence is exercised through intermediaries in possession of more power. Collective agency, where multi-agent mode is employed, and people achieve unity of effort for common cause within diverse self-interests and coordination of distributed sub-functions across a variety of individuals. In a learning context, as elsewhere, all three can be present. For example, learners themselves can initiate a change in the teaching or learning process, either individually or collectively, or they can do it indirectly through parents, teachers, or peers in the possession of more resources. Similarly, teachers and parents can influence the process as well through higher levels with decision-making power, management of a knowledge distributing institution. However, for these actions to be performed, reflection and motivation to act need to be present. The connection between agency and motivation is strong, and from many points of view, the two must coexist as both draw on similar concepts, among which are self-regulation, self-determination, autonomy, responsibility, locus of control, and self-efficacy. In order to feel a sense of ownership over one's learning process and exert agency to avoid mechanistic compliance with the required established practices, the participants need to possess motivation, with the kind of motivation nurture determining the agential activity. Now, I'm not going to dwell on motivation too much, as Marianne Nicolov's talk is focused on that, so I will just quickly go over what is directly relevant to the instruments used in this research. So, in the language learning context, a motivation presents a state when the person expresses disinterest and indifference and sees no purpose in engaging in learning, as opposed to possessing either extrinsic or intrinsic motivation for learning. Extrinsic motivation is further divided into 4 categories within this taxonomy, from external regulation, which is the least autonomous construct, to the most autonomous construct of the 4, integrated regulation. Intrinsic motivation is based on the learner's inner need for self-determination and competence, and is further divided into 3 categories: intrinsic motivation to know, to accomplish things, and to experience stimulation. Now, both quantitative and qualitative methods were employed for data collection in order to enable triangulation. Several instruments were used: questionnaires for parents and teachers, alongside vocabulary knowledge tests and interviews with children. The questionnaires used in the study contained items based on other authors' work, and in the case of the parents, additional ones formulated by the authors of this study to obtain their opinion on the classroom practices in terms of language learning. Based on the observation data and interaction checklists, which recorded the frequency and quality of children's utterances in L1 and L2, semi-structured interviews with L1 and L2 teachers were formulated, alongside structured interviews with children using the Berkeley puppet interview method, adapted for the needs of the linguistic ethnographic study. The children and the teachers were tested for their L2 knowledge with the quick placement test for teachers, while the children's receptive and productive vocabulary tests, containing 25 items each, were created by the authors, with a format based on Peabody picture vocabulary test and expressive vocabulary test, respectively. And both tests contained only the pictures used on flashcards by the L2 teacher in the classroom. The sample included 18 parents, 20 children, as well as 2 teachers working in the kindergarten. From the parents directly participating in the research, mostly they were mothers, and all the parents were rather well educated, as you can see from the table. Both teachers were female with a university degree, and their L2 knowledge within the levels of Common European Framework of Reference for Languages was B1, unfortunately, for the L2 teacher, and A2 for the L1 teacher. Among the children, there were more boys than girls of the age between 6 and 7, which is considered preschool age. The children's mother tongue was Serbian, and they started learning English very early, around the age of 3. Apart from learning English in the kindergarten, almost a quarter of the children also attended private ELT schools, and more than a quarter had private L2 tutors at home, while some even had both of these additions to the language learning experience in the kindergarten. Also, a great majority watched television and cartoons in English at home, and almost a half read books in English at home. Now, the results will be presented in 3 parts, divided by the 3 groups of informants. The parents had mostly positive attitudes towards using L1 in L2 teaching and using L1 for scaffolding meaning in L2 as a mediating strategy. Some expressed their concern that the teaching and learning process was affected negatively by the application of the English-only policy by causing communication breakdowns. In response to an open-ended general question, when asked what they would change in the way their children were being taught English, more than a third of the parents chose to single out the English-only approach without prompt whatsoever. So one parent stated that many of the children are anxious because they do not understand the teacher who constantly speaks in English, which results in creating aversion due to their insecurity. Others gave practical suggestions on the teaching method improvement they would like to see implemented, such as to use Serbian to explain the foreign words mentioned for the first time, as the children often don't understand what they are saying themselves. But they could not do much to alter the preschool's language policy, even though a body of parent representatives in the preschool did exist formally, while parental agency to lie low concerning their children's foreign language learning was in the domain outside of the kindergarten. It happened in their own private sphere at home, where uncontrolled by external forces, they could exert influence on their children's learning by actively influencing their children's motivation for learning the language, and vicariously the children's language use as well, by instilling different kinds of motivation in them. A motivation in case of foreign language learning was revealed in only one case, and many emphasize the importance they hold for their children's L2 learning. As you can see, parents actively work mostly on stimulating children's extrinsic motivation, which is unfortunately a characteristic of many educational systems today as well. But it's important to emphasize that within the extrinsic spectrum, the constructs closer in characteristics to intrinsic motivation were more prominent, while those on the more inherently extrinsic parts of the spectrum fared worse. So as I said, I'm not going to go into more detail. After the presentation, we can look at this. Now, both teachers strove to influence mostly extrinsic motivation, and just like in the case of the parents, the most prominent constructs were those identified by regulation and integrated regulation. While in the realm of intrinsic motivation, knowledge, that is intrinsic motivation to know, was perceived as the most important aim by both. Both teachers' attitudes towards using L1 in L2 teaching were negative in the beginning, but both experienced a waning of keenness for the English-only approach, especially the L2 teacher. She believed that the absence of responsible code switching to L1 negatively affected the teaching process in terms of discipline keeping, limited ability to work on enhancing children's motivation to learn, and on more complex topics of interest to children. And most importantly, nurturing an affectionate relationship with her pupils. Also, the rigid use of the English-only policy hampered her relationships with colleagues who all used their collective agency in order to communicate with her under their conditions, replying to her in Serbian only. So the L2 teacher either showed a complete absence of agency or individual agency through the use of subversion, introducing alternate teaching techniques not supported by the school's management. On the other hand, the L1 teacher did not express any of these concerns, as she shared a common language with the children and also had space to exercise individual agency in these areas. She was given a lot of autonomy in terms of lesson planning and organization by the management, whereas the L2 teacher was required to follow and build on what was done in L1. The L1 teacher was to follow only the specifically expressed children's interests in terms of topics. When the two teachers worked together within a specific bilingual project, for example, the L1 teacher designed it completely on her own, and she acted mostly as the group leader, with the L2 teacher's occasional interjections. Taking into account the differing length of the children's kindergarten attendance, as well as the amount of their exposure to L2, it is understandable that the children's L2 performance was rather unequal in terms of the levels of L2 vocabulary knowledge. So although the receptive L2 vocabulary knowledge mean score was high, as you can see, 80%, the distribution of individual scores was by no means uniform, with scores ranging from the lowest of 48% to the highest of 96%. This was also true for the productive L2 vocabulary knowledge, where quite expectedly, the mean score was much lower at 55%. Classroom observations showed this discrepancy as well, as children were less comfortable speaking L2, but showed greater understanding of speech directed at them. Although the L1 teacher was present in the classroom while work on L2 was in progress, children never addressed her in L2, since the policy was one person, one language approach, and they shared the same L1. Regardless of this policy, however, with the teacher, L1 was produced in 40% of the children's utterances, and L2 accounted for around 60% as observed. Although L2 teachers' aim was for children to move away from learning by heart and mere reproduction, a majority of utterances in L2 were reproductions of short songs and rhymes, with most of the communication reduced to single words used in response to the teacher's questions. The most prominent reason given by children for such practice was their concern about the lack of sufficient knowledge to communicate in L2 successfully, as well as reasons of social nature, mostly conforming to the peer group. Although around 60% of children stated that they would like their L2 teacher to use both languages, a similar number also expressed a wish for the challenge of being required to talk in L2 only during the English time in the kindergarten. But according to their L1 teacher, when she tried to introduce this as a rule, which would mean that when the L2 teacher was around, if they wanted to talk to their peers or the teacher, they would do it in English, it was not welcomed enthusiastically by the children. Some of them laughed, some tried talking in English, but they later decided to go silent after a few days. So L1 teacher decided to forgo the rule. In this case, the children showed collective agency, just like in the case of kindergarten staff, by employing negative action and refusing to speak in order to disqualify the rule. On the other hand, such an outcome could have been caused by copying observed behavior of the staff as well. Now, in order to bridge the gap in understanding, the children exercised proxy agency again by going against the no translation policy, the use of translation either by the L1 teacher or the more knowledgeable peers, with 80 and 70% expressing a favorable attitude towards this practice. As a result, the child with the highest level of L2 knowledge in the group was observed to offer the service of translation to the group of his own accord whenever he perceived a breakdown in communication. In addition, 40% of children exercised individual agency by asking for translation themselves when they experienced a lack of understanding of the L2 teacher's speech. Many of them, when left to their own devices, showed individual agency by practicing L2 outside the kindergarten or in communication with peers. So 30% by their parents to use L2 in spontaneous communication outside preschool, and 50% of children reported they talked to their peers in the L2 of their own accord, even when it was not required of them during L2 time. The discrepancy in the parents' observations of the same behaviors can be perhaps explained by the amount of time parents spend or not spend with their children. The results of this study suggest that children, if given a fair share of autonomy within an emergent curriculum at kindergarten, can successfully use their acquired sense of agency to promote it on all three levels: individual, proxy, and collective. In this case, the development of the children's agential power had incredible influence on an otherwise rigidly defined L2 learning environment, turning the situation imposed by the kindergarten management topsy-turvy. The children succeeded where adults were relatively powerless, transforming the English-only approach into a bilingual one. Unfortunately, this did not result in individual bilingualism for many child users of the language, but rather in a bilingual situation where communication was performed in English only and in Serbian mainly. So in response to the extreme form of the English-only approach imposed on them, the children responded in an equally extreme way by predominantly speaking to the L2 teacher in L1 and by actively asking for translation when misunderstanding occurred, which countered the very essence of the approach. They acted as subversive agents, exercising collective and proxy agency in an effort to reach comfortable levels of understanding and communication. However, without the external pressure, many children exercised individual agency as well by using the L2 of their own accord, both in solitary and social play, contributing to their language learning in that way from a different perspective. Now, this case study offers a valuable insight into the two sides of the coin of the one person, one language approach. It contributes to the existing body of research by confirming both the relative usefulness of the approach through the test results of young learners, but also the existence of a stressful side of the limitations embedded in the English-only approach, both for teachers and learners, adding the parents' perspective too. Similarities have been found with other studies that unraveled a variety of uses of L1 to mediate meaning in an L2 classroom, but mostly to assist the effective side of the teacher-learner relationship. And most importantly, it challenges all three assumptions of the monolingual instructional principle, the direct method assumption, or the implication that instruction should be carried out exclusively in the target language without recourse to students L1, the no translation assumption, which discards translation as an L2 teaching strategy, and the two solitudes assumption, which implies that the two languages should be kept rigidly separate. Now, these are some of the references used, and I thank you for your attention. And I hope that I fit into the 20 minutes that I had at my disposal. And if you're interested in this study in more detail, this is where you can find the complete text. Okay, so.
Dear Daniela, thank you so much. Can you listen to me?
Yes, I will now stop sharing, right?
Okay.
So, just a second. So, all right.
I believe maybe people would like to look at your references.
Oh, okay. Then I will share again. All right.
We have time for questions, just a moment. So first of all, thank you so much for your presentation, for your insightful talk today. And I'm sure that everyone now have more understanding what our agency is in terms of parental agency, teachers' agency, and children's three types of agency that you exposed us and described. And thank you for your insights in terms of how we need to address and intertwining relationship between first and second language during teachers' instruction in early context and early language learning, foreign language learning context. I think we would like all to clap you. Thank you so much. And we have now 5 minutes for 2 questions. And then after all presentations, we will have another 15 minutes for closing and for discussing. So please, you're welcome to ask questions. To ask Daniela. Do you have questions? Dear students, participants?
I think Janina has a question.
Daniela, I'm interested to know to what extent this is something that's quite common in nursery schools and kindergartens, as I know that, for example, in Israel, as you heard, it's quite infrequent that English is taught in kindergarten. In other words, that a foreign language as such is taught in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm. As I said, it is a private kindergarten, so it is not at all common in state kindergartens. It used to be. The state tried to introduce English language teaching in state kindergartens, but it was not very successful. So it was left only to private kindergartens to provide services like these. So this was a kind of elite kindergarten, as you have seen from the, well, social status of the parents and their educational status. So it is by no means a usual occurrence. But what is very usual and frequent is children attending schools, private schools, apart from their kindergarten experience, but not, it's not included in state kindergartens, only private. Yeah.
Thank you. As a question?
Hi, I would like to ask something.
Iris.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for a very interesting. What? So I'm from Israel, okay. And your lecture is beautiful because we have something similar in Israel. It's similar, but it's not. In Israel, we have bilingual Hebrew and Russian speaking kindergartens because we have many immigrants from Russia who want to preserve their Russian. So this immersion setting, immersion learning really works. The question is really, have you tried to check whether they had prior knowledge before and after, and perhaps a control group to see actually improvement in their English? Because I think that for young learners, this is the only way to expose young learners to English. If you think of rules and a teacher-student situation, it's impossible in this age. So the only method that really works is immersion learning or a bilingual kindergarten or school in which you actually teach L2 in class, and this is the language of instruction. And if you think about the critical age hypothesis, which is really relevant here, so we see that young kids have advantages at an early age, but they cannot learn rules. So what you're doing is beautiful. But the question is whether you actually checked pre and after with regard to their knowledge, and is there a continuation to your beautiful work also in schools in terms of immersion learning in which English is the language of instruction?
Daniela, thank you.
Iris. Yeah. Okay, so
please.
Just a quick answer. Unfortunately, this research included a year, so we did not have access to these children at the beginning of their English language learning. So we haven't followed them from the very beginning of their ELT experience. But it would have been nice to have had a longitudinal research, but no, yes. We just, we checked at the beginning of our research and then afterwards, but not before they started learning. But it would have been good because then we could screen for their home experience and what they came to the kindergarten with, yeah.
Thank
and
you.
Now with this Corona experience, we cannot do anything, right?
It's our, our pre and post group hours before Corona and after Corona.
I conducted a study with a student of mine. She's an English teacher, a foreign language English teacher in Israel, and she wanted to teach English in mathematics classes for first grade students. And what we did, we had a pre and after. It was a longitudinal study, and we also had a control group. And we simply checked their comprehension of vocabulary and understanding of instructions. So at the beginning of the year, they didn't know anything. And throughout the year, we really saw a wonderful progress in their comprehension of English and their ability to actually use all kinds of concepts that they did not know before. And the control group, of course, didn't know anything. And we also checked their mathematics. We saw that it was the same, the control group and the experimental group. So this immersion learning really works, and it's beautiful for young learners. And I think that this is something that we have to tell everyone. That's the way to teach a foreign language to young kids, because rules hardly work at this age. And this is really beautiful what you're doing.
Thank you for the insights, Iris. Thank you so much, Daniela. Thank you. And we are going ahead to our second presenter, second speaker, that I'm very, very glad to introduce. Professor Reka Lugosi is our second speaker today. He's an associated professor at the Department of English Applied Linguistics, University of Pécs, Hungary. And I'm very glad to share with you, all our audience, that University of Pécs, our partners in Erasmus cooperation, exchange, mobility exchange, and we are waiting for you when Corona will leave us finally, where you are welcome in our college. I have learned personally a lot from the Professor Lugosi studies, research, in particular, how to teach young children a foreign language, when she raised a reasonable question about the appropriateness of an unnatural learning context, such as a structured learning context in preschool classroom. If structured lessons are appropriate, age appropriate in preschool classroom, or children learn in different way. She asked about how teachers, through their reflections, modify their teaching strategies and offer a natural and enjoyable context for language learning. Professor Lugosi engaged in English teachers training, pre-service and in-service teachers and their professional development. And she is an expert in research on using authentic picture books on children's language and literacy development. So today we are lucky to listen to Professor Lugosi and her expertise on how we can use picture books in a foreign language teaching in preschool context. What does it mean, picture books? What are the benefits? What are benefits of using picture books? And thank you for joining us, and thank you for being our partner. Project. You're welcome.
Thank you. I feel privileged to be with you finally, and to listen and to be part of this very inspiring audience. The presentation focuses on using picture books with children, and actually it goes beyond the EFL context, which is typical in where I live and teach. Therefore, the title seems a bit simplistic. It's about using picture books with children for very many reasons, obviously, and in different contexts. However, I think I chose a very good picture, not necessarily because it's emblematic of me, but mostly because I always find that this picture arises controversy among children. Some of them love it, they think it's very funny, and some of them think it's really frightening. When I asked my own children when they were little, they said it's a frightening picture because the pig is naked. And I was wondering if, with clothes, it would have probably looked less savage. So a brief outline. We will look at what picture books are, what we mean when we use the term picture books. We will also look at how they support children in their social, affective, cognitive, linguistic, and literacy development. And I want to look briefly at all these factors because we know that with young children, all linguistic development is deeply embedded in their social, affective development, and that the development in the area of language and literacy are all delicately intertwined. So it's very, very difficult to look at one segment only, as I believe Iris, one of the respondents pointed out. Actually, they go hand in hand because children are holistic learners. So this is what we will look at the underlying theoretical assumptions. Then we will consider findings from research, benefits and challenges in parallel with suggestions for small-scale classroom research for those of you who are interested. And obviously, I will provide a lot of examples. When I think about picture books, what they are authentic books. And I like to stress this with our students because we sometimes have the idea that authentic is whatever not in the textbook. And or authentic is something that was written by native speakers. When we think about authentic readings, we have in mind books written for entertainment and information. So something that is not developed for language teaching and language learning purposes, and therefore not tailored to language learners' levels. This is obviously both challenging and interesting. Also, picture books have this characteristic that pictures have a key role in telling the story. If there is a story, obviously, because sometimes they contain more information or as you will see from the examples, they don't necessarily have a narrative. Some picture books have a lot of language, some have little language, and some are wordless picture books, like Raymond Briggs' classical example, The Snowman. A very interesting issue that comes up in connection with picture books is that they are often kind of disregarded, very often considered as childish, age-related, I would say, age-related forms of entertainment. Nothing serious. Stepping stones to more serious literature. You start with picture books and then you get on to reading Dostoevsky later on. The examples that I will show will try to show that actually we are talking about a very complex, very multi-layered and highly intertextual genre. So these books very often reach out to other areas, not only in the curriculum, so bring in new information, but also other genres, other readings, pre-readings, pre-texts that children may have. Another feature that we will look at is that the verbal and the visual text interact. So what stops them from being simple readings and dismissed as something childish is exactly the active role that the readers are allowed to have while decoding or reading a picture book. Why? Because a good picture book doesn't necessarily add the pictures to the text, but there is a constant coming and going between the verbal and the visual element. So you can't really stop at one of them. Your mind keeps going from one to the other and keeps linking the two to construct meaning, to create meaning. And this is why we're saying that far from having to be dismissed as something really lowly and age-related, they actually are very, very complex and very cleverly constructed texts, the good ones. We will look, as I said, we will try to see what theoretical frames support the use of picture books with children generally, and then focusing on foreign language learning or additional language learning and development. And I want to start with something that Margaret Donaldson, child psychologist, said in Children's Minds, an early and seminal book. She raised a very interesting question, and I wonder if this is your experience too. She said, why do learners lose motivation? any motivation, any learners, any age over the years. And if we think about how they go to school, and there may be a difference, of course, context here. I went to school, you know, I cried, but other children don't necessarily do that. And I see that they go to school full of expectations, and then this expectation gradually goes down over the years. And by the end of their school years, they become rather blasé, rather disinterested, you know, not so motivated really. And Margaret Donaldson says something very interesting. Well, this is because we don't embed new information. We teachers don't embed new information in a context that makes sense to them. We give a lot of disembedded knowledge, and this will obviously apply to language acquisition, early language learning. So they don't encounter new information in a context that is cognitively challenging, that they can relate to. And Margaret Donaldson uses an expression that I'm particularly fond of. She says, we need to create a context that makes human sense when it comes to children. So it seems that embeddedness is a key notion in education. She also says something that again takes us to picture books, that children make sense of language by making sense of the situation. They don't interpret language, she says, primarily. First of all, they interpret the situation and they make sense of the language, whether first language or second foreign language, based on that situation that makes human sense. So when we think about why use picture books and how picture books support language learning, language development when it comes to children, we have to think of creating a context that makes human sense. And this is where picture books come in the picture, because obviously they because it's something deeply relatable. Story sharing as such is relatable. The storytelling frame is something familiar for children. It's a shared social experience that they hopefully know from their home contexts, although not everywhere. And some of the research that I will refer to here shows that this is not an everyday situation necessarily for all families, but generally this makes a lot of sense. It's also a low anxiety, a non-threatening situation. Another reason why we want to use picture books with children in particular, and we think they're a good choice, is beyond the here and now context, the concrete frame, is that they offer relatable content that is involving, engaging cognitively and also emotionally. And I want to briefly refer you to a very early theory by Bettelheim in the Uses of Enchantment. Bettelheim, child psychologist, Bettelheim claims that fairy tales assist children in their search for meaning. It's important to give children a diet of fairy tales. He talks about fairy tales at this point, exactly because these fairy tales take existential dilemmas seriously. If we think of what happens to heroes in stories, and we think of how they get lost in the forest and how they lose a parent or lose both parents, or, you know, all the terrible things that happen to them, this is what Bettelheim, who was a Freudian psychologist, called an existential dilemma, an existential anxiety. And he says that all these anxieties get symbolic solutions in fairy tales. There is somebody who helps. They find a way out. They conquer the dragon. They become ultimately kings and queens, which is obviously a satisfying human experience, a kind of maturity. So they offer these solutions in a symbolic form at the end of their quest. That is to say, there is an inner journey, a sort of development. And then Bettelheim says that because children have these fairy tale patterns, narrative patterns in fairy tales around them, if they are lucky to have them at an early age, then they grow up as more secure personalities. They have patterns to resort to emotionally, and they discharge a lot of fears during this inner journey. And I will take you to a very, very classical, very widely known example by Maurice Sendak, who's probably my favorite. Where the Wild Things Are. And it's the story of Max, who is rather rude and rather energetic during the night. And his mother calls him a wild thing. And Max says, "I'll eat you up." So he was sent to bed without eating anything. And I just would like you to focus on the top right-hand picture, Max's face. And this is towards the beginning of the book, where he is sent to his room and he goes on his journey to where the wild things are. He becomes their queen. He sends their king. He sends them off to their rooms without eating anything. And when he's had enough of being a wild king, the king of the wild things, he goes back to his room and look at the difference between the faces. And this is what Bettelheim is talking about. If you give a child a story that contains some of those fears, existential fears, you may give a potential solution. It's not that children start making sense of, archetypes and symbols, is that children are able to relate to the emotional content on a symbolic level, on a subliminal level. And there is another example by Anthony Brown, who is probably one of the most popular contemporary picture book authors in Britain. And his books are highly intertextual, a lot of references to surrealist art and other stories. And he always deals with children's problems from a deeply emic perspective, usually little boys. Usually lonely, usually gorillas who are in solitude and trying to make friends. And the book Changes is about a haunting question. On Thursday morning at 10:15, Joseph K. noticed something strange about the kettle. And I bet you realize what's happening to the kettle gradually. It's very similar to a cat. The house was quiet, very quiet, and Joseph's room was as he had left it. And then he saw the slipper. And gradually things are changing. I skipped a number of pictures. When we finally get the explanation to why he has these, visions, that morning, his father had gone to fetch Joseph's mother. Fetch her from where? It's rather frightening because nobody knows. Joseph doesn't know. Before leaving, he'd said that things were going to change. And I often think of myself, of how often I said such things to my children, like things are going to change. How haunting this must have sounded. And this is what is grabbed here. So when we are saying that, just to have a reinforcing ending, Joseph can't tolerate uncertainty, so he goes into his room. And in darkness, when the door opened, light came in, and Joseph saw his father, his mother, and the baby. "Hello, love," said Mom. "This is your sister." And this was the change that was to be expected, except that nobody cared to tell Joseph what was going to change. However, this is exactly the kind of complexity that we're talking about when we say that picture books can be very, very complex, very multi-layered, and children and teachers may return to them every now and then for providing a different level of understanding. I brought this example also because I wanted to show that the content can be relatable in very many ways. And one of the ways is exactly one of the examples is that this unexpressed fear that is very often part of the picture books. Okay, sorry. I skipped. There is another theoretical reference that I want to make is that picture books support thinking and meaning making. So if we looked at using them because they offer a concrete experience and a situation, Margaret Donaldson, we also said they're good to use because they offer emotionally relatable content and help assist the children in their personality development. Number 3, we want to look at how they support thinking and meaning making. And again, just very briefly, I will refer you to Shank and Abelson's cognitive psychologist schemata theory. And they say that actually humans make sense of all new information based on narrative patterns, based on stories. So not only do we make sense of this, of new information based on stories, but we also remember information much better if this is stored in a narrative pattern, that is, something happened to somebody. And when I say new information, I also mean language information, linguistic information, for example. Schank and Abelson claim that new experiences are interpreted in terms of old stories. The more stories we have, the schemata, the richer the schemata are, the more able we become to interpret disembedded information, which is one of the key functions of education, if you come to think of it. And to look at it from another perspective, if we give a child a lot of stories, mind you, this doesn't happen overnight. So if we keep doing it, they simply become smarter because they have background knowledge to which they can link new information. So this is again something I find quite thrilling, even if this is only just a theory. And one more addition here. There are Jack Zipes, whose name I forgot to put down, what a shame. He calls picture books the secret agents of the educational establishment. And I like this because picture books often question ideologies. We have these subversive, unorthodox retellings that make us think it's not the expected story. And again, another classic, which is The Paperback Princess, where Elizabeth meets handsome Ronald. But after a lot of trials and tribulations, she decides not to get married after all. It's a very liberating story. And finally, most importantly for us, picture books can add a lot to children's language acquisition. I won't go into Krashen's comprehensible input hypothesis. It does ring a bell, but a well-chosen picture book can offer I+1 in a meaningful context. And I say meaningful context, partly because of the language context, partly because it's a story, if it's a story, and finally, because the pictures scaffold the new language. And I will just take you through just a few pictures through I Think My Mom's a Witch, which is always a hit with children and adults that I sometimes teach. I never show them the cover. I show them the house, which is not scanned in here now. I show them the house and try to elicit their ideas about who lives there. I show them the house and I ask who lives there. And if they don't say anything, I get going with yes, no questions, because although we know that yes, no questions are not a success with secondary school students, with children who don't have that much language is a very good scaffolding technique. So I Think My Mom's a Witch is a flip-flap book. So you can only see half of the information first, and then you turn the flap. This is not so obvious on the internet, online now. I Think My Mom's a Witch. She has a white cat, but, and then you turn the small flap and it goes, she has a black cat too. And it goes, I Think My Mom's a Witch. She has a flat hat, but she has a pointed hat too. Oh, sorry. And it goes on. I Think My Mom's a Witch. She likes her red dress, but she likes her black dress too, and so on and so forth. And what's happening while we're doing this? Obviously, there are a lot of new words, or some new words, that are supported by the pictures. But the pictures also give a lot of extra information. So there's more to it than the explanation. Also, you have this repetitive structure. I think, and she has, and later on she likes. And I think it's a very good book. And this is very often the case when you have picture books with little but repetitive language, because although your main aim is not to explain, to take them through, I think, and she has, obviously they start acquiring this structure as formulaic language, an unanalyzed chunk. And it's not that they start repeating this without even knowing, obviously, that she has a is composed of she has verb, third person, and so on and so forth. I think this is one of the main reasons why using picture books with little text, repetitive structures, is why we use them, because they offer linguistic input that is I+1 in the sense of both vocabulary and structures. The structures, like I said, are unanalyzed chunks. We know about very serious research by Alison Ray supporting the idea that unanalyzed chunks function as shortcuts, both for children and for adults when it comes to the early stages of language learning and language acquisition in particular. You don't know, you can't analyze the components, but you work with the whole, and knowing that children tend to be or are holistic language learners, this is something very useful. When I read the book for the first time with them, and they usually ask me for another reading, which has been my secret agenda all along, I tell them, you can have another listening, but then you will have to look very carefully at the animals that are in the pictures. But don't say a word, just remember all the animals, which is a good thing because it keeps them silent and for a while, and I can read the book again or share the book again. So they are again exposed to I+1, and then we put together the animals and so on and so forth. So these were the underlying theories, cognitive, social affective, and linguistic, that support the uses of picture books. And very quickly, I would like to take you through findings from research, extensive research having been carried on how learners and teachers benefited from using. Yes, Mila, 3 more minutes. Is this what you're indicating? I'm done? I ran out of time? Okay. I didn't realize, sorry, it rarely happens. I'll just then finish. Findings from research indicate that obviously all these points that I mentioned, incidental vocabulary learning, formulaic language, scaffolding opportunities are there in picture books. And one more thing that we rarely calculate with, literacy development. And literacy development, I'm thinking about this as an overarching concept. So an overarching L1, L2 literacy. A final thing to conclude with is that the fact that we're developing second language or foreign language literacy is a great asset when it goes back to first language literacy. And this is especially relevant for some of our contexts in Hungary that you may also have in different ways, is that children who come from underprivileged contexts have things in their foreign language education that bridges the gap in their first language development, quite because of the interdependence hypothesis. Transmitted academic language skills and motivation to read transmits from one language to the other. The challenges can come in the discussion if you are interested. I'm sorry to have run out of time. I miscalculated, apparently.
It's okay. Thank you so much, dear Reka.
Thank you.
I'm still thinking about what you did present. So insightful, so inspiring, so many benefits, raise curiosity, raise accessibility, the comprehension of language, of a novel language. Diverse level, linguistic level are engaged. And I'm always thinking, how can we apply this engaging strategy to elder children, even so they're not under our focus today. So thank you so much. We have one question, time for one question, please. Audience, no questions? Okay. So
okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
But if we have time, if we have extra time, we can look at these challenges. If Reka wishes to share.
One challenge, I will. I will share a practical challenge that is, it's very difficult for our teachers and for myself as a teacher to find cognitively and linguistically appropriate books. Because one of the things that happens is that we try to look for linguistically challenging books. This is how I failed in a lower primary class with the 3 Little Wolves and the Big Bad Pig, which tells the opposite story with different building materials. And whereas I thought this was hilarious, actually, children did not have the appropriate schemata to make sense of what was funny in this book. So ever since I used this book with teenagers rather than children. So it taught me that the books have to be cognitively appropriate as well. Very often, it's not a language difficulty that children have, but it's a cognitive difficulty. They just can't accommodate what they see. The other challenges relate most often to teachers' beliefs and educational traditions. Teachers believing that there is no time for stories because we need to do more serious work, which often takes us to shared cultural assumptions about what counts as good teaching and age-appropriate teaching. It's also a very strong parental pressure. The need to see, the teachers need to see what's going on is real work. And this is where I think a dialogue with parents is an important thing to raise awareness of what and how benefits their children most. And finally, there's a strong pressure from colleagues when colleagues make comments such as, oh, it's those storybooks again, or I wonder when you do the teaching. This is why I think as teachers, we have to be aware of why we are doing what we're doing in the class. So we can have a theoretical explanation for all the good practices that we have. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Daniela. I know that you did publish a book about fairy tales and how to use them in teaching language. So I think you have a lot of audience that can support Eureka and your passion to use picture books and at different levels, age levels, and we need to think how to engage these ideas, all these benefits, and adopt these benefits for elder children, for adolescents, maybe with comics, I don't know, other ideas, but to return them back to reading and to enjoy reading and enjoy language through reading and through pictures.
Right.
So we are all young children, actually.
Exactly, right.
So thank you so much for your inspiring talk, for all these illustrations, and we are moving ahead to our third presenter, to our, I can't tell guest, not guest, because Dr. Janina Horowitz she exists at her home, in her office in the Ornim Academic College of Education. So Dr. Janina Horowitz is a senior lecturer at Ornim College of Education. She is the chair of the Department of English Language and Literature. She teaches in the undergraduate English Language and Literature Department that she's the chair of, and as well as the graduate MED language learning program. And she's also supervises many theses, research in the domain of orthography, English orthography, teaches language and literacy, basic literacy skills, content knowledge. For many years, Dr. Janina Horowitz examines individual differences between English as a foreign language, between English foreign language learners, particularly with regards to their reading and writing related skills. She's an expert in how young learners build their basic literacy skills in English. She contributes significantly to development of assessment tools. She developed assessment tools for early and for later for English as a foreign language learning children's learners with difficulties, as well as a lot of remedial tools. In addition, I would like to acknowledge her outstanding research in exploring teachers' content knowledge of English language components, and the link between this knowledge and classroom practices. So today, Dr. Janina Horowitz will share with us how to empower pre-service teachers by instruction of basic principles of literacy in English. In her talk entitled Providing English Foreign Language Teachers with Content Knowledge to Facilitate Decoding and Spelling Acquisition. We are welcome.
Nila, you have to let me share. At the moment, the sharing is just a
moment, excuse me. Janina, just a moment, sorry. Please. Is it okay?
Let's see, yeah, great, thank you. So thank you very much. And it's just a pleasure to be a part of this. And I must say that hearing Daniela and then Reka sort of takes me on a trip through my own, you could say, personal narrative of bringing up two children who are English speakers, bilingual children. I'm sure this resonates with a lot of people sitting, participating here today, bringing them up as bilinguals, where we provided the English input. So, and then what I'm gonna do is I will do a sharp turn straight after that, okay? So when I hear Reka talking about picture books, I have to say this was one of the most beautiful parts of bringing up children as far as I was concerned. And to this day, I have a whole range of favorite books on my shelf. And when I think about kindergarten ages and bilingual situations, I know that in Israel, there are, as somebody previously mentioned, Russian Hebrew bilingual kindergartens, there's Arab Hebrew bilingual kindergartens. But as such, and until today, although there is a certain element of pressure from parents, particularly from particular populations of parents, to have English introduced at an earlier stage, the Ministry of Education has been quite adamant that English instruction should not start in kindergarten because it's not a bilingual situation, because it's a foreign language that children are acquiring. The feeling is that if they won't be exposed to that on a more massive basis, they should study it as a foreign language. Now, of course, that's got its advantages and its disadvantages, whatever. The most severe difficulties, I think, that we grapple with is the fact that children begin studying English as a foreign language in elementary school in Israel, officially from 4th grade, but very often from 3rd or 2nd, and occasionally from 1st grade. But the problem is that they really are not exposed to enough language on a daily basis to make it something that's more of a bilingual experience. It's not an immersion experience by any means. And it's something that's formally taught, say, depending on what year it starts, but 3 to 4 times a week for 45 minutes each time. And obviously, one of the, I think one of the steepest challenges is that we grapple with how to best use every second of time of those 45 minutes, because it's clearly not enough to sort of flood children with language. Anyway, I said I'm gonna relate to the previous 2 talks, and now what I'm doing is taking a sharp turn, because I will relate to teacher content knowledge as far as elementary, kindergarten teachers are concerned, although that's not something that I've studied. One of my colleagues sitting in the audience, Susie Rusak, has done some research in that area. but I have been involved in some studies that have looked at elementary school teacher content knowledge. And again, here I'm looking at the acquisition of reading and spelling, and obviously acknowledging the very important, in fact, critical role of whole language, of being exposed to authentic language through books. But in this case, I'm particularly looking at and maybe expressing concern for the fact that a lot of our children, this is my experience in Israel anyway, but I understand internationally, struggle to acquire reading and writing, basic reading and writing skills in English, and first language and foreign language, and what is needed for teachers to facilitate this process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges of English as a foreign language literacy acquisition, and the need, as far as English is concerned anyhow, to teach more than just grapheme-phoneme or letter-sound correspondence. In other words, I'm not only talking about single letter graphemes, but multi-letter graphemes as well. The ingredients for learning to self-teach so that children can independently be readers and writers, and going into teacher knowledge and what Binks, Cantrell, and others have termed the Peter effect, originally coined by Applegate and Applegate, where they spoke about the fact that one cannot give to others what one does not have oneself. So if I am not aware of or knowledgeable of different linguistic components of language, I'm not going to be able to facilitate children's learning of reading and writing. Okay, so going down, and I am talking briefly about what they call the opaque English orthography, the fact that we know that it's not enough to just learn single letter graphemes, that there's a whole lot more to acquiring English reading and writing. In a well-known European study by Seymour, Arrow, and Erskine, they spoke about the English and Danish children who took a whole lot longer to acquire reading. This was all first language, by the way. In English, with the English-speaking children taking the longest, 2 to 3 years, to acquire English technical reading, you could say. And spelling, we know, English spelling is an extended process for language one learners as well, that continues into adulthood. And somebody by the name of Spencer spoke about English spelling being deviant and asking or trying to quantify how deviant English spelling is. And he spoke about a phoneme representation value, which is a single phoneme, for example, in this case that I'm giving here, the E, and how many different ways it can be represented graphemically. And you see here that there are 8 different ways. So obviously the closer a particular value will be to 1, the easier it will be for children to spell and read that particular grapheme. And the vowels, particularly the long vowel sounds, are usually very far from 1. And I was inspired by Spencer, this is some years ago, and just played around with the various graphemes in English, looking at the various representations of the different phonemes, and was pretty sort of blown away by how complex it is to learn to read and to spell in English. There's a lot of information that children need to acquire. And the question is, do pre-service and practicing teachers have the knowledge to navigate their way through these? We know that obstacles posed by English orthography for EFL pupils may be at least as challenging as for English language 1 children, if not more acute, for children who aren't being flooded by the language on a day-to-day basis. So I'm just going to show a couple of three slides from work that I did some years ago, where I was looking to see, I looked at children from 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th and 10th grade, 5 grades, 30 children from each grade, and looking to see how they managed with various reading-related components. And you can see here, what we did is I just showed them single letters and asked them what sound that letter makes. And you can see here that most of them knew most of the the grapheme phoneme correspondences of the single letters. There was a bit of a difference between 5th and 6th grade, but besides for the vowels, where there were some difficulty, they knew the consonants. This is not where the problem was, okay? Their problems began when I showed them multi-letter graphemes. And here, the maximum was 79, and the 10th graders reached 43 out of 79. So these were not graphemes that the students necessarily had studied, and they certainly weren't able to automatically identify them. There were very strong correlations between their ability to identify these multi-letter graphemes and English word reading. And this wasn't, I mean, these weren't infrequent words, these were English frequent words, and their ability to identify multi-letter graphemes correlated very, very strongly with word reading ability. And you can see here also the change between the different grades, where the 10th grade students reached 86 out of 100, and the 5th graders had 46 out of 100. Very often, by the way, we know that the children guess words when they're unable, when they don't have the tools to actually decode the words. And this is another study that I did with my colleague, Susie Rusak, and we looked at children's spelling. And one of the things that we looked at here were novel phonemes for Hebrew speakers. And we looked at particularly at issues of vowels, the fact that they're long and short vowel sounds. The ah is particularly challenging. The ah, as such, the short a, the ah sound, does not exist in Hebrew. But very often, Hebrew teachers represent the ah as being ah. And so there's a confusion between them. And you can see here that for spelling, even good learners in 5th, 8th, and 10th grade really struggled at this. You can also see other novel phonemes such as the TH digraph, the th and the, voiced and unvoiced, as well as the ow, were challenging, with the unvoiced being even more challenging than the voiced TH, and the OU also providing challenges, particularly for those in elementary school. I'm going to show another slide here, and this is because in my attempt to try and see to what extent we can teach multi-letter graphemes, I taught 9th grade struggling and strong EFL children 8 different orthographic patterns. And I kept on sort of teaching a new pattern, using a mini lesson, and then reviewing that, and then teaching a new pattern. And both the struggling and the strong students improved. They both started at different points. The struggling group was very much weaker you can see here they started almost at nothing and came up to 50%, around 50%, and the stronger group started at 30% and got to 76% overall. And what I used a mixed method in this particular study, and children really spoke about, these 9th graders spoke about the fact that they'd never actually been taught the nitty-gritty, the building blocks of English orthography. So what needs to be taught? Obviously the 26 letters and their various phonemes, but in addition to that, the various letter combinations, rhymes, and so on need to be taught and need to be taught explicitly. And what we've done recently in Israel is we've actually mapped frequent words from the various corpuses at A1, A2, B1 level graphemically. In other words, looking to see which of these orthographic patterns are more essential to be taught earlier on and which can be maybe delayed for a later stage. So the question becomes, and this is something that we need to relate to, do EFL teachers have the content knowledge to facilitate reading and spelling acquisition? And this is a recent study that's just been published this year, Susie and Richard Kwok-Shing Wong in Hong Kong. And they found that with the exception of syllabic awareness, kindergarten EFL teachers scored below 50% on a literacy-related questionnaire, including knowledge of phonemic awareness, morphological awareness, and phonics. Now, we know that in order to acquire reading and spelling in the early ages, early literacy, 1st grade, children need to understand the alphabetic principle, and that involves letter sound combination and phonemic awareness. In order for teachers to facilitate that, they obviously need to understand that themselves. Myself, Stephanie Fuchs, and Tammy Katzir, we looked at elementary school EFL teachers in Israel and found that there was a lack of knowledge regarding current research in the field of EFL literacy acquisition. In other words, and I point a finger at myself in addition to other institutions that, that teach or train English teachers, as this whole area is perhaps not an area that is emphasized enough. Emma Weissman, a graduate now of our master's program, and myself looked at elementary school teachers' literacy-related knowledge and their self-reported classroom practices. And again, they received around, well, closer to 60% on a knowledge survey, with the lowest score going to orthographic convention knowledge. And they also, those with lower scores in literacy-related knowledge reported allocating less instructional time and practice to teaching and practicing literacy-related components, which makes sense because obviously I'm not going to emphasize something that I don't know about if I am teaching, okay? So here we get back to the Peter effect that Binks Cantrell, Joshi Houghton spoke about, Washburn, connections between literacy-related knowledge and self-reported practices. Teachers with greater orthographic knowledge tended to allocate more time to these activities in the classroom. Teachers who are more knowledgeable of linguistic components, whether it be orthography, phonology, morphology, will balance vocabulary activities with teaching and practicing phonemic awareness, grapheme phoneme correspondence, and components of word reading. So in other words, you'll see a more balanced approach where, where all these different components are being taught. Adequate literacy skills will facilitate successful vocabulary acquisition and practice. And this is particularly critical in EFL settings because we know that, and particularly maybe in peripheral areas, and children that don't come from families where they're exposed to a lot of English, we know how little they actually hear English and are exposed to English. And so reading is a critical way of enriching their vocabulary. And if they don't have the ability to read, then clearly they won't be able to use this channel effectively. Taking this one step further, and I know I don't have a lot more time, but I'm going to race through this last bit. There have been some studies which have actually shown the connection between teacher knowledge, what they do in the classroom, and children's outcomes. And these are really, really complex studies. But Shane Piasta and her colleagues have done this in elementary school, in kindergarten, and McCutcheon has also done this in kindergarten and first grade, and shown this strong connection between teacher knowledge, what they do and how they teach, and children's successful outcomes. I'm just going to show here a couple of things that I did here. I'm going to show you the impact of a semester course where I taught literacy-related English components to students, and the impact. I did a mixed method study, and this is a survey that's used by many. Things like talking about what kind, different syllable types, what the impact of those syllable types on vowel sounds, on the phonemes, looking at different letter patterns, and seeing to what extent teachers are able to identify the particular phonemes within those patterns, manipulating the sounds in phonemic awareness tasks, and showing some kind of awareness of morphemes in words. And I'm just going to show you here that in this particular study, I was comparing undergraduate students who participated in a course of this nature to a group which did not participate, and a graduate control group. And although the graduate controls were significantly stronger at the beginning of the semester, at the end, the orthographic undergrads had raced ahead. And at a later stage, I followed this up and saw that 4 months later, the advantages were maintained, which is very encouraging. One of the things that's important that I'll state at this point is that we often we see that although there's an improvement, teachers don't reach ceiling, which makes me wonder how we should keep working on this in different kinds of ways to make teachers truly masters of the English language and the various components. These are just, I've just paused here under qualitative findings because teachers I've found all the way along, including in master's classes where we talk about this, that teachers are incredibly thankful for having the opportunity to study these different aspects. And even though we know that in high school, for example, they don't really work on this, or the syllabus doesn't point them in this direction, teachers very often talk about the fact that they can interweave this knowledge in discussions that come up in the classroom, and this is very, very beneficial. Okay, so I am going to end because I think the time is almost up here. So just to sum up, I obviously feel quite passionate about the importance of both pre-service and practicing EFL teachers acquiring literacy-related English knowledge, about the importance of them understanding the orthographic depth of English. We know that skilled readers very often are unaware of the difficulties and complexities involved in acquiring English literacy. They need to pay attention to novel phonemes. And we know that in every country, this involves a different set of phonemes that they need to be aware of. they need to utilize teaching time effectively, balancing the various language components, and this is no easy task. And with or without textbooks, we all, I say we, because it's not they, it's we, need to learn to explicitly teach the various conventions in order to facilitate accurate reading and spelling development for younger and older EFL learners. And there's quite a load of references here. So I'll be happy to share this with anybody who'd be interested to see this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much, dear Janina. Thank you for so many years of bringing up a new generation of English teachers, for your great work as a researcher and also educator in our college, and for promotion and your passion for promotion of this domain in the Ministry of Education, with the people who meet with you and listen to you for so many years, and for your insights. Thank you so much. Actually, I also have a question, so let's start from questions. We have time for we have 5 minutes for 2 questions, please.
Hi, I'd like to ask something. First, thank you for a well-structured and very insightful talk. You mentioned the list of high-frequently words with those letter combinations. Is this list available anywhere?
Yes, it actually is, and I'd be very happy to share it. This is something that my colleague Fern Levitt and I have been working on. In other words, what we've done is we've taken band 1 and band 2, which are A1, A2, and some B2, obviously, in the band 2 list, and mapped these. And again, I'll be very happy to share this with anybody here. Anyone can write to me, obviously, and I'll send it. And we'll make it freely available, because it's just a very useful way of crossing the 2 issues of vocabulary. And
I think that it's very important that these combinations are presented within words, not in an isolated manner.
100%, absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing is, of course, that it also enables one to prioritize what one should be teaching.
Right.
You know.
Right. So practically speaking, how would I be able to get this?
Just write to me and I'll send it to you.
Okay, I'll copy the email. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for your ask. Another question? Comment, please.
Yeah.
Okay, I would like to ask a question, Janina. Is teachers' pronunciation and problems with teachers' pronunciation, like distinguishing between that you mentioned, also a part of their content knowledge in Israel and in other countries, because our teachers still do not distinguish between 3 and 3.
I would say that, and we've spoken, myself and colleagues have spoken a lot about this, because one of the things that the 9th graders that I taught orthographic conventions to in this 2020 study, one of the things, interestingly enough, that the strong students spoke about was that they found that they were able to pronounce English words better. In other words, the fact that we focused in on particular multi-letter graphemes, and I brought little mirrors to class, and they looked at their articulators in the mirror, and they pronounced the th and the, okay? Or they pronounced the a. I've done that with 3rd graders. It was incredibly useful for them, because they were receiving feedback about how to actually articulate these particular graphemes. And they said that they never had that kind of experience before. So in a lot of ways, we're talking about, you could almost call it this very multi-sensory experience, where they're not only hearing how I do it, and I'm a foreigner as far as they're concerned, but they do it themselves. I invite them to do it themselves. And they look at themselves doing it. They're seeing what their tongue, teeth, mouth are doing. And I think that provides a huge amount of feedback for them about how to articulate that particular grapheme.
Interestingly, future research can check how this articulation, how is engagement in these articulation practices with mirror during the lesson can improve their spelling skills as well, in addition to their awareness of these orthographic patterns and teachers' content knowledge as well. So a lot of work ahead. Thank you so much. Just again, and the time runs, and I'm coming to our last but not least guest, distinguished guest, coming from originally from Hungary, but now Professor Marianne Nicolov lives in California. So thank you also not only for willingness to participate, but also for sacrificing your time and your morning, your sleeping hours, and joining us today. Professor Nicolov's early career starts from teaching English as a teacher, as an English teacher for a decade. Her research interests are very diverse and include the age factor, early learning and teaching of modern languages, assessment of processes and outcomes in language education, individual differences such as aptitude, attitudes toward English learning, and motivation, how all these factors contribute to language development among children and adolescents. She also was engaged for many years in English teachers, professional development, teacher education, and also studied teachers' beliefs and practices. I did not tell, I think so. Professor Nicolov is a professor emerita of English applied linguistics at the University of Pécs in Hungary. I personally contributed a lot from her insights in a way young children can be engaged in language learning, from her insights concerning motivation and how this concept is complex and how this concept is changeable in terms of lifespan and the children's cognitive and emotional development. And today we are lucky to listen to her talk about language learners as a foreign language, learners' motivation in the classroom. And she will present a novel framework concerning learners' motivation in the classroom. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy your talk. So you can share, the screen is shared for you.
Thank you. Where is my own talk? There it is.
Yes.
And I need to use this mode. Okay, the first hurdle in my way. It's so good to see people I know, even better to see some people I've never met. It's great, and I'm honored to participate in an event like this. And I would like to say that I've already learned a lot from the presentations. So today I would like to propose a framework for researching young learners' motivation in the classroom. And I'm focused on the classroom because there are so many theories about everything which are not really relevant for classroom teachers, that I would like to narrow my focus to how everything can be applied So I will talk about young learners' motivation and their identity and how they are related. I would like to outline some of the main trends in motivation research, the sources and types of their motivation, how much variability, complexity, and interactions across those variables have been documented, and talk about language learning behavior as a motivated phenomenon. And the third part will propose a framework or a model for researching young learners' motivation. And I'm very proud that we put forward such a thing with my colleague, Jelena Mihaljevic-Jigunovic. And this whole talk is available in a well-written form, which is a joint publication with her. And anybody who wants it, I'm delighted to send it over. So first of all, I would like to start from, although Daniela almost killed some of my points, to how language learning motivation has been reconceptualized and re-theorized in the context of contemporary notions of self and identity. And this reframing was put forward by my Hungarian colleagues, Zoltán Dörnyai and Ushioda, who have been proposing all kinds of new approaches to researching motivation, although their focus is not young learners, but motivation in more general terms. And what is relevant to discussions concerning young children is about young learners' self and identity in terms of how fluid these are, how much they are work in progress. There is nothing set. It's all changing very dynamically all over the place and time, and it's definitely not linear. And everything that happens to young learners, we have to emphasize, is actually co-constructed in and out of the classroom. I will be talking about who impacts their motivation in a minute. So we should be thinking in terms of the language learning experience, which is now a new concept proposed by Dörnyai a year ago, as the perceived quality of learners' engagement with various aspects of the language learning processes. Well, I don't see anything particularly new, because I think when we talk about motivation and teaching and learning, it is always about engagement, and every teacher knows that. So I can see a cycle of coming back to old ideas in a new, whatever outfit, back from the why and how people learn. I would like to just define a few concepts very shortly so that we can then use the terms in this short presentation. So identity concerns how we understand our own relationship to the world. In other words, who we are and how we are seen, and how we know others see us. There is also a term concerning linguistic identity, which is about everything I've just mentioned in terms of languages that we can use, using meaning, understand, as well as produce, and languages, including all the languages we've ever been exposed to and are aware of. There is the term expertise, how well somebody knows a language or the languages, and affiliation, which means how attached we are to and how we like those languages, which actually concerns also attitudes. And finally, inheritance, the familiar connections to one's languages. And so far we have heard about multiple languages, like in a context like Israel, you cannot talk about languages without mentioning multiple languages in just one breath, and quite a range. In Hungary, it tends to be only Hungarian and the target language. So the situation really differs from context to context. So any discussion concerning young learners should start with the main aims of why early language teaching happens. every document across the globe tends to emphasize that the purpose of early language learning is to target the affective domain. Children's attitudes, to develop positive attitudes towards the target language, languages in more general terms, and cultures also in more general terms. They tend to emphasize that young learners tend to be highly motivated by definition. Their anxiety is low. Their self-concept tends to be more positive than at a later age, and a growth mindset should be promoted. These are, of course, very generalized statements, but they are overwhelmingly typical of curricula. There are certain cognitive and metacognitive aims, and we have just heard one particular domain from Janina. These include skills in the target language and certain strategies which allow students to achieve whatever targets there are in more or less efficient manners. However, identity is rarely mentioned among the aims, although one would say all of the previous items belong to identity formation. In my view, the realistic aims should include to establish and maintain motivation over time. And this is where the main challenges are from the perspective of motivation. On the one hand, there is a mismatch in most contexts between what happens in the classroom and outside the classroom. The impact of extramural or extracurricular English, most importantly English, is now overwhelmingly a key component. And secondly, and this is something that I was not particularly aware of when I was a beginner, is the slow development of young learners. Everybody is so enthusiastic and they tend to assume that the younger, the faster, which is the exact opposite. The younger young children are, the slower their development, the steps are teeny tiny, and this is where the problem usually emerges. Their motivation declines over time if teaching is not tuned to how they learn. Therefore, what we need is an age-appropriate, cognitively challenging and intrinsically motivating board of tasks in all the 4 skills over time. Of course, all 4 skills only when the children are literate in their first and second, or who knows how many languages. But that's the key, that the tasks have to be age appropriate, tuned to their level. They need to be cognitively challenging. They can't be childish and boring. And they have to be self-rewarding by themselves, the way the tasks actually work out. Which leads me to my next point, task motivation. Most tasks for young learners tend to be meaning focused, and this is a key to teaching them and allowing them to learn efficiently, because that's what their thinking is focused on, meaning and not form. Form may emerge gradually over the years, but the key is in task motivation, the intrinsic value of the task and the feeling of mastery, the progress that they can actually do. They are interested in doing and can do what they are expected to be able to do. The term of motivated learning behavior is something that teachers know a lot about, because that's what they focus on. Whether children are paying attention, whether whatever is going on is of interest to them, and engagement is the key from the teacher's perspective in the motivating classroom activities. Engagement meaning they are participating or listening or just looking at you as a teacher while you are trying to do the magic. Now, motivational research traditionally looks at instrumental versus integrative orientations. And we know that although, as Daniela pointed it out, instrumental motives, little reward for doing something, are part of the educational system. And as a teacher of English, one cannot neglect what the children actually expect. Therefore, very often we just have to go with the flow and adapt whatever the school system favors. Integrative orientations, as I have found out over the many years I used to teach children, they emerge over time, but they are not the key components why children would actually engage in tasks in the class on a daily or minute-by-minute basis. Recent research has focused on the motivational self system, comparing the ideal L to self versus the O to self. I personally feel that this is a somewhat misleading and less relevant trend for teachers, especially teachers of young learners. We know that less able children are more motivated along the O to self type of lines, whereas many of the highly motivated, very favorably supported children from very good socioeconomic status families, they are also concerned with their ideal L2 selves from quite an early age, but this is not something that the school promotes. It's more like what the children bring with themselves, as we know from Rivi Carmel's research in the Israeli context. So identity as a learner and as a user of the target language, these are the two aspects that would impact what young learners can do and want to do in the classroom and beyond when they are able to actually apply what they have learned. The most important factor contributing to motivation at a young age is the L2 learning experience. What happens, how they live through these experiences in the classroom, how they feel they are doing, and ups and downs are perfectly typical in how motivated the students are. And I need to point out that for teachers, this whole discussion of individual differences is very meaningful because they cannot just focus on each and every individual all the time when they have, in a lucky context, let's say 12 children in a group, in a less fortunate context, 60 children in a group, or even 120, as I have observed some classes in China. Now, you have to keep a balance between focusing on the individual child being motivated one way or the other, and everybody else in the group, because teaching and learning happens in a group. There are certain contextual variables impacting what happens and how motivated learners are. And whatever happens is impacted by valued others. And I like this term of valued others. The parents, first of all, because the children come from families, their teachers, and their peers. And in the framework I will propose in a minute, these roles change over time. Therefore, we need to bear in mind how and in what ways they impact children's motivation. And there are all the other individual learning variables, which include the children's age, their gender. There are significant differences between how girls and boys tend to behave. Their self-concept, what they think about who they are and what they are able to do. Anxiety, which actually does play an important role in young learners' lives as well. Their aptitude, which is sometimes conceptualized and measured, sometimes neglected, assuming that every child has the same aptitude, they are just wonderful. And their identity, who they think they are and how they think they are seen. Now, In our paper, we argue that the impact of parents, teachers, and peers change over time. And that's something that is worth focusing on. The motivation also plays an important role, which is very often neglected, because some of the tasks lose their intrinsic value. And this is why the earlier the better is not quite such a straightforward claim, because the earlier you start, the activity or task that would be highly motivating maybe at age 8, but you have been doing it from age 6 through 7, at age 8, it's like, give me a break. Let's do something different. We've done it. We know it. We don't want to do it again. So early starts programs can result in boredom later. The earlier you start, the sooner you lose the magic of doing a rhyme or a picture book or whatever otherwise intrinsically motivating activity. I would like to bring in the role of feedback and assessment. Very often, studies on motivation neglect the role of how much, what quality, and how helpful feedback children get, not only from the teacher, but also from their peers, and assessment, which may induce anxiety, even in contexts where there is no formal assessment. And the boredom can be avoided, it's a question mark, by integrating content across the curriculum, which in fact is what most of the early program curricula promote, if it's only themes or school subjects. This is an area where a lot of research has been conducted in certain contexts, for example, in Spain, in my view, with very limited research methodology. Therefore, I wouldn't generalize any of the findings. And we need to also consider remotivation. Once children have been demotivated, they lost their motivation or it has significantly declined, it has to be regained, but it's very difficult. Once they don't want to do something, it's very difficult to make them want to do the same thing. Now, it's helpful to look at the age range that we integrated into this framework, where we think in terms of stages, developmental stages, although developmental stages have recently got some really bad rap. They still exist, although they overlap and there are large individual differences. So stage 1 will sound very familiar to everybody, where oral activities are overwhelmingly present in the form of games and other playful activities, where assessment is minimal or there is no assessment. And children are being socialized into playful foreign language learning activities. At the next stage, which tends to range from age 8, 9 to 11-ish, they are already almost well socialized into learning a foreign language. There is a focus on literacy skills and some assessment tends to be integrated into the teaching learning process, and the playful component tends to decline in amount and also in quality. Finally, in many contexts, primary school lasts up to age 14-ish. Therefore, the third stage tends to cover children include children between 12 to 14. These are adolescents whose cognitive skills are already more well developed. The tasks, therefore, tend to be more demanding. There is more assessment and in some contexts, self-assessment, even if it's not promoted, children are able to compare their own performances. They compare themselves to their peers, and there is a lot more real world use of the target language, most importantly, English. Now let's look at those significant others. The teacher's role tends to be of very high value. I used to be a very highly appreciated lower primary teacher. That's why I got stuck in the area. However, the teacher's impact declines over time, over the age range I have just discussed. And although the teacher may be the role model for young learners, this role is somewhat more critically taken care of by the children as they grow older. I would like to emphasize the bidirectional role of motivation. And this is something that I have not really read about in the literature, and this is what I think is an innovative aspect. Motivated teachers can motivate learners better than unmotivated or demotivated teachers. However, children's motivation also impacts teachers' motivation in a positive way. In other words, they are so strongly interrelated that they have to be borne in mind. I mean, these bidirectional moves. The teacher's role is that of scaffolding. So when we talk about teaching and learning, I would emphasize learning, because teachers may teach whatever they think is appropriate. If children don't learn, there is no outcome. Now, the peers' impact over time increases. At the age of 6, children are aware of other children, but it's more important what the teacher says and what the teacher wants. However, around age 11, 12, whatever the peers comment on is either hilarious or very stressful. Peers become important role models, and there is a lot more competition, even if the system does not promote competition. There may be cooperation, hopefully, if teachers promote it, and peers can scaffold one another's development. Finally, parents. The impact is complex. We know the very serious impact of the socioeconomic status and parents as role models, but unfortunately, the parents' role also declines over time. I would like to just show a picture of how we visualize the interrelationship between teachers and learners' motivation, how they interact, and the smaller visual is meant to show if the teachers and learners' motivation is less a key variable, they interact in that way. Whereas if it's larger, that's it. Now, I'm proposing a task-based feedback for learning approach, which is embedded in school and social context. Every context is different. But if our approach is based on what the children are expected to be able to do, and there is feedback promoting learning all the time, this is how motivation can thrive. And there is always a dynamic interaction between the learner, the teacher, the peers, and the parents, but at different levels and stages in each and every school and social context. So this is the slide proposing those dynamic changes. And I would like to simply emphasize that the ovals overlap, so those stages do overlap. There is no strict line between them. The teacher's role in the triangle shows that it declines over time. The school context within which the teacher and the peers whose impact gets stronger are defined by how the school actually works. And the family, whose impact also declines, is part of the larger social context. So this is something we proposed in that paper that I'm happy to share with anybody, is meant to help design and implement new studies, taking into account how significant others can influence learners and teachers' motivation, and how all of these interact over time. If anybody sends me an email asking for the paper that I'm promoting here, I'm happy to share it, but Mila can also circulate it or make it available on your website. And I hope that this is, thought-provoking enough to have maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Thank you so much. I'm still, I'm in your talk still, deep in your talk. Thank you so much for your insight.
It was quick, I know.
A lot of questions and a lot of thoughts, you know, concerning all these factors together, and complexity, and also developmental motivation as a developmental notion, concept. So even though you have some like comments concerning developmental approach, you present the developmental notion in development. So thank you so much for your insights. I think we are all contributed from this new concept and new knowledge. So questions, please.
Marianne, could you just put up your slide, the last slide with the model again?
Uh-oh, I've just stopped sharing. Where did I put it?
Because I'm just wondering how it's quite clear that that motivation plays an enormous role, and motivation very often can conquer or overcome a whole lot of other maybe challenges that students might have. But one of the things that I'd be very interested to see is maybe the interaction between linguistic aptitude or linguistic ability and motivation at different stages. I don't know.
That concerns mastery motivation. The more able you are to do whatever you are required to do, the more motivated you will be in case the next task is tuned to your level. However, if you are required to do the same boring thing which you are already at the mastery level doing, that demotivates children. And this tends to be the case in research in Scandinavian countries, where it's a known fact that most boys tend to come to school and join the EFL class with strong skills in English. And most of the teachers, unless they have the same age children, have hardly any idea what sort of gaming activities those kids might be doing. Therefore, they don't see English at school as conducive to their development of English. They actually see it as absolutely inappropriate, because what they are taught or spoon-fed, they can already do very well. And what they can do very well is not appreciated in the class because the teacher doesn't know how to respond to what they know. Plus, most of the girls have no idea what's going on. So knowing more or being more able can also create certain challenges for motivation, not only for the children, but also for the teacher. If I'm the teacher and I see that the children can do things that I cannot follow or I cannot comprehend, that also impacts my motivation. Now, I don't know if I...
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm thinking of the other side of the spectrum. And yes. I'm thinking of those that we come into contact with so often here in Israel, students that are maybe on the weaker side of the spectrum and yes. feel that they're not able to acquire English, that English is something that's just sort of miles away from their reach.
Well, think about, So think about what they feel or others in an extreme heterogeneous class where those who are very able and have exposure to English in different environments in their everyday life. So that makes the whole situation even more complex.
Yes, I fully agree. So
but wait, can I just thank you, Marianne, for an amazing ability to present intricate and complex paradigms in simple, easy to follow way.
Oh,
I just need this, this is an amazing ability I think not everybody has, to just present complex thinking paradigms in a simple way that is doable, that is very easy to follow. And I'm embracing this, this stage division. I think it's very clear, makes a huge common sense. And definitely so. I mean, the older the kids, the more the peer impacts their motivation and less the home environment. But all the, and so it makes everything, you know, makes a big sense. I just wanted to raise an issue about the outside world being taken in consideration, because we're worried here about motivating them, because many of the things the teachers do, and sometimes they do the most amazing things, and they bring in the games and they do all the right things, but still they are disconnected from the kids' daily life. It's very difficult to keep track of what's going on, of what they watch on TV, of what they collect, of what they look at. And I think this maybe is another area that we can look into, in addition to or alongside with finding out about how to maintain and keep up their motivation with time.
Yes,
over time, because as we all agree, English takes time. It's not, it's not a crash thing. You need a lot of patience to learn a language, and they lose patience. This is a speedy age. They want to know everything, chick-chack, so.
Yes.
It's over time. That's the challenge.
I fully agree.
Time, keeping their motivation over time.
Yes, that's the main challenge. Establishing motivation, being motivating by using a new task, something exciting, that's a big deal. However, the bigger deal is to maintain this not only from class to class, but from year to year. Now, that's where the big challenges emerge. And I can paraphrase the know thyself principle. You have to know your students. If you don't know who the students are and what they think and why they behave the way they do and what makes them tick, you will not achieve much. And you will be also frustrated because you're doing your best, but these little naughty kids, they don't appreciate my wonderful activities. Now that's frustrating. And that's why I think it's time for research to focus on this interaction between teacher motivation, teachers' beliefs, teachers' identities, knowledge, which was mentioned today, and their teacherly skills, which means age appropriate as well as proficient, and how their daily lives are influenced by the children's feedback. Like if I feel the children in my class don't learn anything, now that does not motivate me. I used to be very frustrated when the kids did not remember what we learned a week earlier. And I thought, come on, what am I doing wrong? So I tried another way. I tried 6 other ways. And then I asked them. I was smart enough to ask them. And I actually learned probably most from the kids because they are more than willing to share. You may not want to hear all they want to share.
Thank you. Frida, would you like to ask something?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I come from another angle. My specialty is teaching Hebrew to young children here in the United States. And I was wondering, does the research that was done on the different stages and the different attitudes and so on, does that apply also to other languages, namely,
Absolutely.
in my case, Hebrew?
Absolutely. Everything applies to children's cognitive, emotional, whatever development, literacy development, and any classroom teacher, actually, classroom teachers tend to teach only the lower primary years. I had the opportunity to teach the same children over 8 years, because the school system in Hungary is based, or was at that time, based on 8 years. So if you look at this wider age range, those stages, it's not by coincidence I keep emphasizing that the ovals overlap. Those are typical, even in the US. From playful activities to more form-focused literacy development, these are typical activities and typical things that teachers and people in charge of curricula bear in mind. They know how children can use rule-based learning abilities or their memory, or how they can be imbalanced. This is just common sense knowledge, but also based on the literature.
And as a following question, since English is considered such an important language throughout the world, being the lingua franca and so on, Hebrew certainly is not. And certainly not for children who are living in the United States and growing up here. And so there is an aura to knowing English for non-English speakers. I don't know about any aura of, I'm sorry, that Hebrew speakers are looking for, or that, and certainly there is not much daily exposure to the Hebrew as it is, let's say, in Israel, or I'm sure in Hungary. So do you still think that these strategies would work?
This is why I keep emphasizing that motivation research should focus on tasks. Because if you are teaching, let's say Hebrew, but it could be any other target language, and the tasks you give those children are interesting by themselves, they thrill them because they can draw in Hebrew, and what they draw in Hebrew is exciting, or the games they can play, or the rhymes they can cite are worth doing, then you can establish and maintain motivation over time. But it has to focus on the task. And that's why I said that this recent paradigm focusing on selves in the future, young children are in the present. They are in the moment. And if something is exciting right now for me, they will do it with pleasure. And I'm sure they would do certain playful activities, of course, depends on the age, in Hebrew, because it's like a puzzle. Language learning is a puzzle solving activity, in fact, as well as a social activity. Languages are about the people, but to get there so that you can use it for learning new things from other people or communicating with other people, you need to get there. But the same is true for first language acquisition. Parents do things with young children which are motivating by themselves.
Understand.
Can I maybe, thank you. Can I, Frida? I don't know you, but maybe I can just try and I can try and maybe say something coming and say that, in my opinion, there's a bit of overrating for the sexiness of English, because from my experience, I see that quite a lot of local kids in Israel don't see the point of learning English. And so we sometimes overrate the English language as being so sexy and popular and wow, wow, wow. So I'm with you.
I agree. Any language could be as attractive as another language. It's mostly parental pressure that puts kids today in the English class. Any language can be fun.
As you stressed, Marianne, as was discussed today by Daniela, by Reka, by Janina, We are returning back to teachers, from children to teachers, and vice versa. And in this couple, we have another side that should include parents and parental pressure, but it's also changeable over lifelong period and lifelong learning. So thank you so much, for all our presenters, for your insights, our students, our researchers in Israel, because we invited a lot of researchers who deal with English and not only with English. For me, who focus on early language learning in diverse contexts, in bilingual contexts. Hebrew is a heritage language, Russian is a heritage language, bilingual Arabic, Hebrew speaking education. I learned a lot and contributed a lot from this talk and discussion. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being our friends. I received a lot of thank you here from all our participants who left a bit early because today we are going to switch on our Hanukkah lights. And happy Hanukkah for all of you. And happy Merry forthcoming Christmas for all of your families in Hungary, in Serbia, in California. I wish, on behalf of our team, organizing team, I wish you Happy New Year without COVID, with our face-to-face meetings, with an option to give hugs and kisses, and to diminish or reduce at all social distance between us. So I'm really excited and touched by meeting you and by your contribution. And I think all together, we all participants join us and join this opinion. Thank you for being with us.
I wish everybody very motivated teachers.
We are all teachers, you know.
But the teachers you train, I wish you had many more.
You had experience with our teachers. So I remember your talk to our teachers. I remember, what did you say to our teachers? This child can be fascinated.
Say hello. Does it sound better? Just say hello. And good luck to everyone.
And we invited our students, and we will share from your permission this recording with our students who can't join us today because of holidays, Hanukkah holidays. And thank you for everyone.
Thank you. This was very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just suggest and support Marianne's suggestion for you to perhaps, I think that all of the talks today have been published in one form or another. So you might want to share all of the papers with all the participants if they're interested, so that they do not have to write individual emails to each of the authors and so on. So you might want to take all four and then distribute. Maybe easier.
Good idea. Excellent idea. Yeah.
So please,
thank you.
Daniela, Reka, Marianne, and Janina, our brilliant staff of guests, send your publications to us, to Lisa and to me. We will put them on our site of the two sites, International School, Ornim's International School, and our research department. And also recording will be put on our research department site. And each of you who is interested in recording, we can send. Another question, if you, our guests, are ready to share your presentations, I will say you just again, thank you, to share your presentations with audience. Just let me know if it's possible.
Yes.
And I will be glad to meet with you again and to continue to discuss this inspiring and exciting topics, how to engage children in learning in different ages, not only in early ages.
Thank you.